So to continue with the anterior triangle, now we are going to study the boundaries of digastric triangle. So what is the anterior boundary? Anterior belly of digastric. What is the posterior boundary? Posterior belly of digastric and stylohyoid. From the styloid process to the hyoid bone, you call it as stylohyoid. Okay. So antero-inferiorly, anterior belly of digastric. Posterior-inferiorly, posterior belly of digastric and stylohyoid. Base, that is superiorly, lower border of mandible. And floor, which muscle do we have? Mylohyoid, the textbook open page, mylohyoid. Okay. And then we also, if you just cut this mylohyoid, we will see tongue muscle, that is hyoglossus, and more deeper we will also see middle constrictor. At least if you write one muscle, that is also enough. So floor, I have shown you all the three muscles. First thing is mylohyoid. If you remove mylohyoid, below this you will see hyoglossus. Below this, if you go into a deeper plane, you will see middle constrictor of pharynx. Okay. So all these are the three muscles of digastric. Digastric triangle is also a very, very important triangle. Okay. Now just to see what are the contents. If you understand this picture, you will write in your own words. First try to understand the diagram. See, this is the anterior belly of digastric. Okay. And this is the posterior belly of digastric. So you are finding in the floor mylohyoid muscles. So here, what are the, if it is mylohyoid muscle in the floor, obviously the vessels are called as mylohyoid vessels and nerves. And muscles supplying the tongue, hyoglossus. So close by you have hypoglossal nerve, and the artery which is entering into face coming from external carotid artery is facial artery. Okay. So here you will see the submandibular gland and submandibular lymph nodes. Facial artery, hence facial vein also. Try to figure out the things so that it becomes easy for you. So I'm repeating. In the floor, we have mylohyoid muscles, hence you can write mylohyoid vessels and nerves. What is the other name I told you for digastric triangle? I said it is submandibular triangle. Why do we call it as submandibular? Because we have submandibular gland over here. Okay. So that is, this is all digastric triangle. So submandibular salivary gland, facial artery, facial vein, isn't it? So that is. Now, now if you just see the posterior most part of this digastric triangle, you are also finding parotid gland. That is the lower part of the parotid gland. You are finding this is external carotid artery. Okay, and carotid sheath with its contents. Okay. So this is all digastric triangle. You can just divide, see submandibular salivary gland we are seeing. Okay, submandibular group of lymph nodes, facial artery, facial vein, mylohyoid vessels and nerves. Okay, this is the external carotid artery more behind. Okay. Now, see the next very, very important triangle which is usually asked in your like exams is carotid triangle also. Now, let us see the boundaries of carotid triangle. So, what are we finding? Superiorly, this muscle. What is this? Posterior belly of digastric. Then you are finding inferiorly. Which muscle are we finding? Superior belly of omohyoid, isn't it? Then behind, what are we finding? Sternocleidomastoid. So all these muscles, this triangular space, whatever we see, that is the carotid triangle. Okay. Now the floor, that means if you see in the floor, these muscles are found. What are those? We are finding the hyoglossus, thyrohyoid muscle. Okay. Then so hyoglossus, thyrohyoid muscle, and we also find middle constrictor and inferior constrictor. This is middle constrictor, this is inferior constrictor. We know this is hyoglossus. Okay, we know this is thyrohyoid. So all these muscles are seen in the floor of this like carotid triangle. Okay, carotid triangle is little behind. So this picture I have shown you so many times. So the chief content of this carotid triangle is carotid sheath. Okay, what is carotid sheath? Carotid sheath is 5 marks question or 3 marks question. It is a condensation of deep fascia which is seen around the carotid vessels, like big vessels of the neck. So what do we find medially near to the midline? I told you this is the transverse section of neck taken at the level of 7th cervical vertebra, like this, the cut section of neck. So you are finding the carotid sheath with its content. So medially you are finding common carotid artery. Laterally we are finding internal jugular vein. Okay, so that is, so medially common carotid artery and laterally internal jugular vein. Okay, then what is the posterior thing? I have been telling you always, this is vagus nerve. Okay, and what is present in the anterior wall of the carotid sheath? Ansa cervicalis. Okay, ansa cervicalis. So now contents of carotid triangle, here you see here, this is the arch of aorta. From the arch of aorta, now on the left side directly you will see there is common carotid artery. This common carotid artery will be dividing into external carotid artery and internal carotid artery. So contents of the carotid triangle, you will see the termination of common carotid into external and internal carotid arteries, and 5 branches of carotid artery you will see in carotid triangle. There was a question like write any 4 branches of external carotid artery as 3 marks, isn't it? Here you can learn 5 branches of external carotid artery which are seen in carotid triangle. So what are these branches? Superior thyroid artery we studied when we were doing thyroid gland. Ascending pharyngeal artery we will see in pharynx. Okay, lingual artery will be supplying the tongue. Facial artery will move towards the face, and occipital artery supplies the occipital region. So these are the 5 branches what we see in carotid triangle. Okay. Then, so this is the same thing which is written again. Okay, so superior thyroid, ascending pharyngeal, lingual, facial, and occipital. So these are the branches of external carotid artery which we see as content of carotid triangle. Okay, so apart from that, the carotid triangle also contains this vein. What is the name of this vein? Internal jugular vein. So internal jugular vein will have certain tributaries opening into it. What are those? We have common facial vein, we have lingual vein, we have superior thyroid, middle thyroid, and the pharyngeal veins. Okay, then. So what are the nerves we see in carotid triangle? See, before I take you to ansa cervicalis, there is a very simple picture which is showing you certain nerves. This loop is ansa cervicalis, we know pretty well. Apart from that, you are finding the spinal accessory, which we discussed as essay yesterday. That means, see, to be very simple, you are finding 10th, 11th, and 12th cranial nerves. 10th is vagus, 11th is spinal accessory, and 12th is hypoglossal nerve. Okay, so these are the nerves what we see in the carotid triangle. Okay, 10th, 11th, and 12th cranial nerves, and 2 nerves related to carotid sheath. Ansa cervicalis, that is necklace, so which is embedded in the anterior wall of carotid sheath, and sympathetic trunk embedded in the posterior wall of carotid sheath. So practice this diagram for ansa cervicalis. Okay, so I'll show you. See, ansa cervicalis. So actually ansa hypoglossy also it is called as, embedded in the anterior wall of the carotid sheath. It has this superior root, it has this inferior root. Superior root is formed by the joining of C1 and hypoglossal nerve. Inferior root is formed by joining of C2 and C3. This loop is supplying infrahyoid group of muscles. Okay, isn't it? So contents of like we are finding vagus nerve. See, the straight nerve running between the common carotid and the internal jugular vein is the vagus nerve. Okay, we are finding the spinal part of the 11th cranial nerve, that is the accessory nerve. Okay, we are also finding the nerve which is going towards the tongue, that is 12th cranial nerve, that is the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, apart from that, we will find so many lymph nodes in the carotid triangle. They are called as jugulodigastric or jugulo-omohyoid lymph nodes. Okay. Now coming to the applied aspects of the carotid triangle. So we can check for carotid pulse. In like when we were doing physiology, we had done this like jugular venous pulse tracing. So I told you the jugular, internal jugular vein and common carotid are very much side by side. Hence the pulsations of common carotid are just transferred to the internal jugular vein. That also we can check there. Okay. Like when we were doing physiology, we have discussed about chemoreceptors and baroreceptors, where we have carotid bodies. I told you there we have the special nerve endings which will read the pressure changes and also chemical changes. No. So that is like role of carotid bodies, that is also related to this area only. Okay. So this is the carotid pulse, how we can check. Okay. So again, this picture is here. This is the common carotid artery. Here we have specialized nerve endings, isn't it, which are called as the chemoreceptors and baroreceptors. Chemoreceptors will take the chemical information. If there is any increased carbon dioxide in the blood, the chemoreceptors are triggered in the brain and they will increase the rate and depth of respiration. And baroreceptors are stretch receptors. If there is any increase in the blood pressure, there will be peripheral vasoconstriction which will bring the blood pressure back to normal. This picture is also helping us to understand these chemoreceptors and baroreceptors which are associated with the common carotid bifurcation point. You call it as carotid body, and this bulge is called as carotid sinus. Okay. So internal jugular vein can be punctured very easily because it is very much accessible point. Okay. So in order to check the venous pressure, okay, sometimes we can give antibiotics and fluids also if the person is on complete parenteral nutrition. Okay. So in case if there is any occlusion in this carotid artery, deposition of fat and all, we can actually do a surgical technique called as endarterectomy, where this inner lining of fat can be removed. And we are using this common carotid point because it is very much accessible point. Okay, but it is not so easy because it has chemoreceptors and baroreceptors also, and if we are not taking proper care, so there may be a reflex inhibition of heart and person may die also. So we should be very careful. Okay. So cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, we know, isn't it? So like if you see the whole brain, like the largest part of the brain what we have is the cerebrum only. We have two cerebral hemispheres, right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere, isn't it? So when you just look at the cerebrum, it is showing so many folds so as to increase the surface area of the brain. So these folds are actually called as sulci and gyri. Okay. So and basically we have certain lobes of the brain, like in the frontal side. In the front we have frontal lobe, and the side we have parietal lobe, and behind we have occipital lobe, and towards our ear we have temporal lobe. Okay, so these are the four lobes. Now when you just see the superolateral surface, so many further sulci gyri will be there, which I will explain you very clearly. Just let me give some introduction points before I take you to that. See, so it is like cerebrum is occupying the anterior, middle cranial fossae and also the supratentorial part of the posterior cranial fossa. So the cerebrum is, the cut section of cerebrum will show outer gray matter and inner white matter. Even inside the white matter, I said we have gray matter collections. This we did, basal ganglia, internal capsule also we did, lateral ventricle also we did, isn't it? So coming to the cerebral hemisphere's external features, so when you see the cerebrum from outside, it has one surface which you see from lateral side. You call it as superolateral surface. If you do the cut section of the brain, in the center you have one surface which you call as medial surface, and the surface which you see from down, you call it as inferior surface. So the cerebral hemisphere, basically we study under three surfaces: superolateral, medial and inferior surface. Then it has four borders, like it has superomedial border which is towards falx cerebri area. Falx cerebri, I told you, it's a fold of dura mater dipping between the two cerebral hemispheres. So we have superomedial border, inferolateral border, then we have medial orbital border and medial occipital border. Okay. So in order to explain these borders, I'll take you to one more PowerPoint which is equally good. So just wait. See, in this picture, actually, you can see the section of the brain also where the outside area is gray matter and inside area is white matter. And inside white matter, again, we have gray matter collections, which are called as basal ganglia. In the cut section, you are finding an empty cavity, which is called as lateral ventricle, isn't it? So that is. So cerebrum, when you talk about the poles, borders and surfaces, this PowerPoint is little much better. So I told you it has three surfaces. The poles are, we have like a frontal pole, temporal pole and occipital pole. So now surfaces, we have lateral surface or superolateral surface, medial surface, and if you see from down, you call it as inferior surface. Okay. So in order to show you borders, I have brought you to this PowerPoint. So see here, the four borders we have at the highest point in the midline, you call this border as superomedial border. Okay. When you see from down on the lateral side, we have inferolateral border. This is the inferior view of the brain. So here you have only one half is shown, the other half is not shown here. Okay. So on the medial side, there is one more border on the inferior surface. You call it as medial orbital border. Okay. And as you go more posteriorly, there is one more border which is called as medial occipital border. So like that, we have four borders. Okay. Superomedial border, then infero-medial, superomedial, inferolateral, then medial orbital and medial occipital borders. Okay. Now, so we have three poles. What are the three poles we have? See, the pole with the frontal lobe is the frontal pole, the most pointed area. Then behind we have occipital pole and then we have temporal pole. Okay. Then also each cerebral hemisphere has four lobes. So what are the four lobes we have? See, we have frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe and temporal lobe. So suppose if you draw one line between the frontal lobe and parietal lobe, there will be a depression. All depressions are called as sulci, elevations are called as gyri. So this is the central sulcus. Okay. Then as you go behind, we have parieto-occipital sulcus. Between the frontal and temporal lobes, we have lateral sulcus. Okay. And if you draw one line which is actually extending from parieto-occipital sulcus to the lateral sulcus, then this imaginary line will divide parietal lobe from the temporal lobe. And if you extend one line from the parieto-occipital sulcus to pre-occipital notch, which is just 5 centimeters in front of the occipital pole, so if you just draw an imaginary line, whatever area is behind this dotted line, that is the occipital lobe. So these are the four subdivisions we have: frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe and occipital lobe. Okay. So now I will take you to the previous PowerPoint because Salsegere are little easily explained over there. So I hope you are able to see these are the pictures with different colors. Yes, yes. Okay, so we have frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. So the sulcus between the frontal and parietal, you call it as central sulcus. The sulcus between the parietal and occipital, you call it as parieto-occipital sulcus. The sulcus between the temporal and frontal lobe is actually called as the lateral sulcus, which is actually very important, lateral sulcus. Okay, and further, parieto-occipital sulcus is only shallow and you are just extending the lines to join the lateral sulcus to divide this whole superolateral surface into four lobes. Now, in each lobe, we have certain sulci gyri. So this picture looks very complicated, but I want everyone to practice this diagram. I'll explain you this very slowly. You need not worry at all. So we know this orange in color, whatever lobe has been shown, that is called as frontal lobe. And I told you, whatever depressions are there, they are called as sulci. And in between depressions, whatever area are there, they are called as gyri. So let us name sulci. Sulcus is singular, sulci is plural. So this is the central sulcus you are finding here. This is the lateral sulcus you are finding here. Okay. Now, from the lateral sulcus, you are finding there are two extensions which are actually called as horizontal ramus of lateral sulcus and ascending ramus of the lateral sulcus, which is extending into the frontal lobe. Okay. Now, into this frontal lobe, you are finding like in front of the central sulcus, this sulcus is called as precentral sulcus. Very simple. You are finding two more sulci. What are those? You are finding superior frontal sulcus, inferior frontal sulcus. So overall, how many sulci we found now? In front of the central sulcus, we found precentral sulcus. Then we found superior frontal sulcus, inferior frontal sulcus, horizontal ramus of lateral sulcus, ascending ramus of lateral sulcus. So once you know these lines, okay, sulci are depressions. So between these sulci, whatever elevations are there, you call them as gyri. So in front of this central sulcus and precentral sulcus, the name of this gyrus is precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus. Similarly, between these sulci, for superior and inferior frontal sulci, we have three gyri. What are those? Very simple names. You just name them as superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri. Superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus. Okay, so that is. Then actually this area which is divided by these three, like ascending ramus and horizontal ramus. So here we have three areas: pars opercularis, pars triangularis, and pars orbitalis. Okay, pars opercularis, pars triangularis, and pars orbitalis. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. So this finishes the sulci and gyri of frontal lobe. Okay, so Niharika, if you can share, no, I was looking for this table only. See, frontal lobe, we have central sulcus, superior frontal sulcus, inferior frontal sulcus. What are the gyri we saw? Precentral gyrus, superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus. Okay, inferior frontal, further three subdivisions by anterior horizontal and anterior ascending ramus of the lateral sulcus. What are these? Pars orbitalis, pars triangularis, and pars opercularis. Okay, you learn this table and draw the diagram. More than enough. Your essay will finish. We are done with frontal lobe. Once you are done with frontal lobe, let me take you to the parietal lobe. Now in the parietal lobe, green area, see we know this is central sulcus and behind we have postcentral sulcus. And there is one more sulcus here which is called as intraparietal sulcus. Once you name the sulci, we need to name the gyri. So what are those behind the central sulcus and between the central and post-central sulcus? This area is post-central gyrus, isn't it? Post-central gyrus. Then this is superior parietal lobule, this is inferior parietal lobule. Above intraparietal sulcus, superior parietal lobule. Below intraparietal sulcus, we have inferior parietal lobule. So once you know this, again you can go in the form of table. So two sulci, postcentral sulcus, intraparietal sulcus, and postcentral gyrus, superior parietal lobule and inferior parietal lobule. In inferior parietal lobule, we have again three subdivisions. I will show you. Anterior or supramarginal gyrus, anterior, middle, and posterior gyrus. I will show you. See this one. Actually, from temporal sulcus, you are finding this upturned area. Like these two lines are extending here. So this becomes superior, middle, and inferior marginal gyri. Superior, middle, and inferior marginal gyri, which are actually the upturned edges which are coming from the temporal lobe. Once you are done with parietal lobe, let us see temporal lobe. Very simple. So in the temporal lobe, what is the major sulcus which is dividing the temporal lobe from the other two lobes? Lateral sulcus. This bold black line is lateral sulcus. Okay, so within this temporal sulcus we have two lines. What are those? Superior temporal sulcus, inferior temporal sulcus. So between these temporal sulci, we have superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal gyrus, inferior temporal gyrus. Okay. So these are the three gyri. Now let us see in the form of table. It becomes easy for you again. Superior temporal sulcus, inferior temporal sulcus. The gyri are superior temporal gyrus, middle temporal, and inferior temporal gyrus. Now coming to occipital. This is the last thing, occipital lobe. So in the occipital lobe, in this view, you are finding lunate sulcus, you are finding lateral occipital sulcus. Okay, and the gyri are like inferior occipital gyrus, superior occipital gyrus. Okay, so same thing is given in the form of table also. So occipital lobe, we have transverse occipital. Whatever is given here, you better list out. Though few sulci are not visible in this view, okay, in the picture. So the sulci we find here are transverse occipital, lateral occipital, lunate sulcus, superior and inferior polar sulcus, and calcarine sulcus. Gyri are arcus parieto-occipitalis, superior occipital gyrus, inferior occipital gyrus, gyrus descendens. Okay, this finishes superolateral surface of the brain. Okay, superolateral surface of the brain. Okay. Now, once you do the superior, actually, if see, you are finding the other views also. This is the medial surface. I want to just finish it off. Though it is not asked, but sometimes medial surface of the cerebrum also may be asked. So on the medial side also, we are finding few sulci and gyri. So suppose if it is like frontal lobe, which is shown in this orange color. So in this area, you are finding this is central sulcus is only partly seen. You are finding medial frontal gyrus. Okay, what do we see on the medial side? Corpus callosum, okay, which is connecting right and left cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so what are the parts of corpus callosum? We have rostrum, genu, body, and splenium. Okay, in just above the corpus callosum, the name of the sulcus is callosal sulcus. Okay, and the name of the gyrus is cingulate gyrus. Okay, this whole thing is the frontal lobe. In front of the central sulcus, this area is called as medial frontal gyrus. Behind the central sulcus, this is parietal lobe. Okay, and here this area is actually called as precuneus. The area which is adjacent to central sulcus on the medial side, you call it as paracentral lobule. Paracentral lobule. Then this is occipital lobe. In the occipital lobe, this calcarine sulcus is very much clearly visible here. Above this, you call it as cuneus. Okay, and as you move more interior, you call this area as isthmus. Okay, so this whole thing is temporal lobe. So this medial side, but medial side of the temporal lobe, it shows collateral sulcus, occipitotemporal sulcus, and the gyri are medial occipitotemporal gyrus, lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. Okay, and this area is parahippocampal gyrus. So you need to practice this diagram, then only you will be able to correlate with this table. Medial surface, what are the sulci and what are the gyri. Similarly, on the inferior surface also we have sulci gyri. So what are the various sulci gyri? Let us see. See, this is inferior surface of cerebrum. So on the inferior surface, this area is called as the orbital part, and this complete area behind the lateral sulcus, this area is lateral sulcus. In front of the lateral sulcus is the orbital part. Behind the lateral sulcus, we have the tentorial part. So in the orbital part, we have H-shaped orbital sulcus. This is like Hyderabad, H-shaped orbital sulcus. Okay. Then this is the tentorial part. In the tentorial part, those same names what we found on the medial surface, here the name of the sulci will be same, occipitotemporal sulcus. This is occipitotemporal sulcus, this is collateral sulcus. The names are medial occipitotemporal gyrus, lateral occipitotemporal gyrus, this is parahippocampal gyrus. As you move more medially, this area is called as rhinal sulcus. Okay, so this is occipital lobe, which is shown in yellow color here. Okay, so again, if you see in the form of a table, where is the table? See, inferior surface, we have olfactory, head-shaped sulcus, no? Orbital sulcus, collateral, rhinal, occipitotemporal sulcus. Try to keep the picture open and try to just understand all this. I'll show you this gyrus rectus. See, this is actually olfactory tract. Below this, you will have the olfactory sulcus. So this area is gyrus rectus. This medial area is gyrus rectus. It is labeled here. This is gyrus rectus. Head-shaped orbital sulcus we have, no? So here it is named as anterior, posterior, medial, lateral orbital gyri. Corresponding ones are gyri. Anterior, posterior, medial, lateral orbital gyri. Okay. So for today, this is more than enough data. Otherwise, you will get super saturated. You may not even understand. So we did extensively, in fact, anterior triangle. We did 3.5 triangles. We have understood along with the few other topics like ansa cervicalis and all. Okay. What are the other questions we have? Chorionic villi, I will take along with embryology. Thyroid gland, we did as an essay. Parotid gland, we did as an essay. We will do again anyhow once few questions are completely done. Circle of Willis, we did. Bell's palsy is for facial nerve. I will do it as an essay question. Thyroglossal cyst is also embryology. Submental triangle, we did. Okay. Pterion and midbrain, I will show you, but the time is very less. So what are the... So we'll do the other subject better once the time is lost. Okay. Vivek, do you have any problem beta? You wrote something in chat box. I didn't understand. Any problem with understanding? Okay, midbrain anyhow I will take as 5 marks question. Okay, in my next class. And pterion is actually the meeting point of 4 bones. Okay, frontal bone, parietal bone, sphenoid bone and temporal bone. Okay, frontal, parietal, temporal and sphenoid meeting point is called as pterion. Okay, so that is pterion and it is related to middle meningeal artery. Middle meningeal artery. So this is enough for anatomy today. So I'll send link for physiology. So please be ready. Okay, I'm stopping here.